The card was laminated. I noticed that right away. Not a printout, not a sticky note, not an email I was supposed to check. An actual laminated card. Block letters printed on cardstock. The kind of thing you'd make if you expected it to get handled a lot and needed it to last. Abby Garza handed it to me in the parking lot outside the visitor center, along with a corpse-issued hard hat and a ring of maybe 15 keys. It was just past 2 in the afternoon. Gray sky, cold enough that my breath showed, but not cold enough for the snow that was definitely coming. The lot was empty except for her white government pickup and my truck. She'd been waiting when I pulled in. She was maybe late 40s, sturdy, the kind of build you get from decades of walking job sites. Dark hair pulled back, some gray in it, corp windbreaker, khaki pants, steel-toed boots. She shook my hand like she meant it. "Raymond," she said. Not a question. "Yeah," I said. That was pretty much the whole introduction. She walked me through the visitor center while I held the card and the keys. The building was closed for the season. Displays covered in plastic sheeting, gift shop dark, bathrooms locked. It smelled like cleaning product and old carpet. She showed me the office I'd be using, pointed out the landline on the desk, the emergency binder on the shelf, the coffee maker. Said a few maintenance people might come by, but they'd announce themselves ahead of time. Then she stopped and looked at me. "The card," she said. "Read it." I read it. 5 rules. Numbered, which I appreciated. I like numbered things. 1. Lock the office door by sunset, not close it. Lock it. 2. If I heard whistling from the reservoir, turn on the spillway beacon and face the wall until it stopped. There was a switch on the office panel marked beacon, and she pointed at it twice. 3. Never answer the landline between 1:13 and 3 a.m. It would ring. Don't answer it. 4. Never cross the yellow chain into intake gallery C. 5. If a vehicle with no license plates appeared at the gate, kill all lights and get under the desk. Stay there until it left. I read it twice. I'm not the kind of person who immediately starts firing questions. I figured she'd explain. She didn't, really. "These aren't suggestions," she said. "Okay," I said. "The beacon switch. You know where it is." "You pointed at it twice." She almost smiled at that. Almost. I had questions anyway. The whistling one was the weirdest, so I asked about it. "Acoustic phenomenon," she said. "The water, the spillway geometry, the valley walls. It happens certain times of year. The beacon disrupts the resonance somehow. The engineers disagree on the exact mechanism." That sounded like something a person says when they don't want to say the actual thing. But I'd driven 4 hours from Pittsburgh with everything I owned in my truck bed, and I needed the job, so I typed "acoustic phenomenon" in my notes app and kept going. I asked about the plateless vehicle, too. "Trespassers," she said. "Teenagers sometimes. No plates is how we flag known problem vehicles. If they see the lights off, they usually move on." That one at least made a certain kind of sense. She walked me back to the lot. The reservoir was visible past the chain-link fence and the empty marina slips. Kinzua was big, steel gray in November, the hills running down to the water on the far side. There was a wind off it that smelled like cold mud. Abby watched the reservoir the whole walk back, not casually. She kept glancing at it the way you monitor something on a job site, the way I used to watch trench walls for cracking. Not nervous, exactly, just attentive in a way that had nothing to do with anything she was saying to me. I noticed it. Didn't say anything about it. She gave me her cell number, said she'd be by every few days, daylight hours only, she added, which I thought was an odd thing to specify. She got in her truck and drove out. I stood in the lot for a minute with the keys and the laminated card and the hard hat and watched her go. I put the card in my shirt pocket. The keys went on the desk inside. The first night was quiet until it wasn't. I'd set up in the office. I had a sleeping bag, a folding cot, a paperback I wasn't reading, and my laptop. The cores had Wi-Fi, which surprised me. I ate a sandwich from a turkey hill on Route 6 and read about a third of a Wikipedia article about the Seneca Nation before I fell asleep with the light on. I woke up at 1:12. I don't know why. No sound, no movement, just awake. The landline rang at 1:13. I was already sitting up when it started. The caller ID said, "Damn office." I looked at it. The phone was right there, maybe 2 feet from my face. Damn office. The call was coming from inside the building, or at least that's what the display said. I was the only person in the building. I didn't answer it. I watched it ring. 4 times. 5. It stopped at 6. The room went quiet. I sat there for a minute, then got up and checked the lock on the office door. Still locked. I went to the small window that looked out toward the parking lot and the fence and the water beyond it. That's when the whistling started. It came off the reservoir, just like Abby had said it would. A simple melody, not complicated. Just a few notes repeating. The kind of thing you'd hear someone whistle walking down a hallway. I almost recognized it. It sat right at the edge of familiar, like a song you know but can't place. I hit the beacon switch. The spillway beacon was mounted on the building's river-facing side. When it kicked on, the light came through the window, a big red pulse, slow and regular, washing across the walls. I turned away from the window. Rule 2 said, "Face the wall." I faced the wall. The whistling kept going. It was moving. I could tell even without looking. It shifted along the shore, getting closer to the building. The red pulse swept behind me. I stared at the corner where the wall met the ceiling and counted beats. Then the whistling changed. Not a different melody. More like the melody folded into something that had a shape to it. A word shape. It said my name. Soft. Slow. The way someone says a word when they're figuring out how their mouth works. Raymond. I kept facing the wall. My hands were flat on the plaster. The beacon pulsed. I don't know how long I stood there before it stopped. 10 minutes, maybe less. At some point, the silence just settled back in and stayed. I sat on the cot until daylight. I didn't sleep. Around 7, I unlocked the office door and walked out to use the bathroom down the hall. There were wet boot prints on the tile. They came from the direction of the main entrance, moved down the hallway toward the intake corridor, and went back the same way. Full boot treads, like someone had walked in soaking wet. The water had dried at the edges, but the centers were still damp. The prints went straight to the yellow chain strung across the entrance to intake Gallery C and stopped. The chain was still latched. I stood there looking at it. The padlock hadn't moved. There was a faint smear of dust on the shackle, still intact. Whatever had walked up to that chain hadn't gone through it. Just stood there, then walked back out. I went back to the office, put the laminated card on the desk in front of me, and read it again. All 5 rules, top to bottom. Then I made coffee and added boot prints Gallery C chain to my notes app, right under Acoustic Phenomenon. That was the first night. The second night, the phone rang at exactly 1:13. I'd been watching for it. My phone propped against the lamp with just the clock running. Nothing else open, no apps, just the numbers. 112, 112, 112. Then the landline went off and the caller ID lit up. Damn office. I didn't touch it. 6 rings and it went quiet. The whistling started about 4 minutes later, same place. South end of the reservoir, moving toward the lot. I hit the spillway beacon, faced the wall, waited. That was the pattern. Every night, same order. 1:13, then the whistling, then nothing. By night 4, I'd stopped watching the clock. I could feel the last few minutes before 1:13 before I could explain why. At 1:11, I'd find myself already sitting up, already listening. I'm not a particularly intuitive person. I've worked construction tech for 8 years, and most of what I do is read measurements and follow specs, but something in me just started tracking it. Some background thing. I didn't love that. I kept a notebook by the cot, one of those black and white composition books from Dollar General on Route 6 in Warren. I wrote down the time the call started, how many rings, when the whistling began, what direction, when it stopped. You write it down. Even when it seems obvious, you write it down. Because 3 weeks later, when something goes wrong, you want the record. That's just how it works on a job site. I applied the same logic here because it was the only logic I had. The calls always lasted 5 to 7 rings. The whistling always started south and moved toward the lot. It always stopped before it reached the parking area. I don't know why. I didn't want to know why. The mornings were the weird part. The nights felt like waiting. The mornings felt like inventory. Day 3, there was a handprint on the outside of the office window, low, near the sill, like someone had pressed their palm flat to look in. The glass was cold and the print was still damp. The hand was about the same size as mine, maybe a little wider across the palm. I looked at it for a while. Then I went inside and wrote, "Handprint, exterior office window, lower left pane," in my notebook and made coffee. Day 5, I found water pooled under one of the folding chairs in the break room. Not a lot, maybe a cup, spread into a rough circle on the tile. The ceiling above it was dry. The pipes were dry. There was no reason for it to be there. It smelled like the reservoir, that flat mineral smell with something underneath it I couldn't quite name. I mopped it up with paper towels, threw them away, and washed my hands twice. Both went in the notebook, clean and simple. I'm not great at writing incident notes in a way that sounds alarming, probably for the best. Abby showed up on day 3. Pulled into the lot around 10 in the morning in her core pickup, knocked twice, came in without waiting. She had 2 coffees. I don't know from where, there's not much between the dam and Warren. She handed me one and asked how the first couple nights had gone. I said quiet. She nodded like that was exactly what she expected. We did a walk of the exterior together. She moved fast, always a step ahead, always facing forward. Checked the generator housing, the gate mechanism, the main building corners. She got to the intake galleries at the end and asked, casual, like it was an afterthought, whether I'd had any reason to go near them. I said no. She said good. Nothing to check down there in winter anyway. She didn't mention the boot prints. I hadn't either. I kept waiting for her to bring them up. She didn't. She came back on day 6. Same thing. Daytime. Quick. Another coffee. This time, she walked the perimeter by herself while I watched from the doorway. When she came back in, she mentioned that teenagers from Warren sometimes came up to mess around near the dam. She said the acoustics along the reservoir were strange. That sound carried in weird ways off the water at this time of year. Pressure changes in the intake tunnels. She said all of this while looking at her clipboard, not at me specifically, more like she was saying it to the room. I said I'd noticed some strange sounds. She looked up, asked what kind. I said water sounds mostly. She wrote something down and said that was pretty normal, and left 20 minutes later. I added Abby, acoustics, teenagers, pressure in tunnels to the notebook. Underneath it I wrote, asked about galleries again and circled it. The 9th night was different. I was at the desk around 11:45 doing nothing useful. Old texts mostly, the kind you scroll back through when you're tired and don't want to think. The gate camera was up on the monitor the way it always was. Usually it showed the empty lot, the gate arm, the tree line. A vehicle pulled up and stopped at the gate. I looked at it. It took me a second to figure out what was wrong. Corpse maintenance truck, dark green, right shape, right size, but no plates. I checked the rear angle on the second camera. Also bare. I remembered Rule 5. I killed everything. Monitor off, desk lamp off, the little LED strip under the cabinet, all of it. I got down behind the desk and sat on the floor with my back against the drawers. The monitor was off, but I reached up and turned it back to the lowest brightness setting I could get. I could see the feed, barely. Dim gray glow. The truck sat at the gate for about a minute and a half. Then the driver's door opened. Nobody got out. The door swung open and hung there. I watched. The cab looked empty. No shadow moved. The door was open and nothing happened for what felt like a long time, but was probably 40 seconds. Then the truck reversed. No headlights. It rolled backward into the dark at the edge of the tree line and was gone. The door was still open when it went. I stayed under the desk for another 10 minutes. Then I got up, turned the lights back on, and sat in the chair looking at the gate camera feed. Empty lot. I wrote, "Plateless truck, gate 1147, driver door open, no driver, reversed, no lights," in my notebook. Then I sat there until 1:13, did the phone, did the beacon, waited for the whistling to stop. I didn't sleep. In the morning, I drove to Warren. The Warren Public Library is on Market Street, 2 stories, brick, parking lot always half full. I got there right when they opened at 9. The woman at the desk pointed me to a back room with a microfilm reader and a row of filing cabinets when I said I was looking for historical coverage of the dam. She said the Warren Times-Observer had been archived on microfilm back to the 1940s. I'm slow with microfilm. Took me a while to figure out the reader, and the older reels were damaged at the edges. I got through it. There was a lot about the dam construction, project updates, engineering milestones, ribbon cuttings. I skimmed most of it. The Seneca Nation coverage came up in a series from the late 50s into the early 60s. The Corn Planter Tract, which was Seneca land in the valley, had been under a federal treaty. The treaty turned out not to matter. When the reservoir filled, the valley went with it. Farms, houses, a cemetery. The articles covered it in the careful, flat language of that era, everything handled properly, everyone taken care of. The photos were something else. Families outside houses they were leaving. Grave markers pulled from the ground for reburial somewhere else. Whole rows of them loaded onto a flatbed. I'm not going to pretend I understood all the legal history. I didn't. But I understood enough to know that a lot had gone under that water, and not all of it by accident or agreement. Then I found the Sawyer Crane piece. Short article, maybe 200 words. October 1964. A core intake worker had been killed during an unscheduled water release in one of the intake tunnels. He'd been performing routine maintenance when the release occurred. Body not recovered. The investigation was ongoing. I looked for a follow-up and found one item 2 weeks later, still ongoing. And then nothing. No resolution, no findings, just silence. I wrote his name in my notebook. Sawyer Crane. October 64. Body not recovered. I drove back to the dam. The incident binder was in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet in the office. Abby had mentioned it on day 1. Orange cover, site incident log and label maker tape, and said it was mostly routine maintenance notes, not worth reading. I believed her at the time. I opened it when I got back from the library. The entries went back to the mid-70s. Different handwriting in each section, sometimes 2 or 3 different hands within a single year. Each entry was dated and signed. The format varied a little. The content didn't. Whistling from the reservoir. Landline calls at 1:13. The time was noted in almost every entry, some with a circle around it. Water on the floors, wet prints, pooling in the break room. Several entries mentioned a vehicle at the gate, no plates, driver's door opening, nobody exiting. Someone in 1988 had written a full paragraph about hearing their name come off the water after the whistling started. Careful printed letters, like they were trying to stay precise. The entry ended. Beacon protocol followed. Event passed. The last entry before mine was dated 3 years ago. Initials I didn't recognize. TM. It said whistling, 1:13. Prints, chain intact. Same as always. But in the margins, not just one hand, not just one section, but throughout the whole binder in different pens, different years, printed in cursive and scratched quick like someone was reminding themselves, was the same thing. Do not go to Gallery C, not a rule, not a policy citation, just that over and over from people who'd sat in this same office across 40-something years. I closed the binder and put it back in the drawer. Then I went and stood in front of the yellow chain for a while. Padlock the same. Dust on the shackle the same. I didn't touch anything, I went back to the office and started my log for the night. The storm came in on a Thursday, about a week after the library trip. I'd been watching it build most of the afternoon. The sky went that particular greenish-gray you get over the reservoir in November, and by 4 o'clock, the wind was doing something to the water that looked wrong. Choppy in the wrong direction. I ate a granola bar I found in my jacket pocket and checked my phone. 60% chance of precipitation. Not exactly storm language, but the sky was using storm language pretty clearly. Power went out at 5:42. I know the exact time because I was looking at the clock on the break room microwave when it happened. The colon blinked once, and then everything went dark. Not a flicker, just gone. The generator kicked in about 20 seconds later. There's a utility shed around the back of the visitor center, and I heard it start up, that low diesel grumble that worked its way into the floor. The overhead lights came back on but dimmer, that yellowish backup power color. The computer rebooted. The gate camera came back online. I checked the spillway beacon indicator on the wall panel, the little green LED that meant it was running. It was dark. I hit the test switch twice. Nothing. I went through the protocol sheet Abby Garza had taped inside the panel door and found the beacon's circuit breaker in the electrical room, labeled Spillway BCN in permanent marker on a strip of tape. I flipped it off and on. Still nothing. The beacon was out. I stood in the electrical room for a second. I knew what that meant. I'd read enough of the binder to know what that meant. Rule 2 existed because the beacon did something specific enough that 30 years of night watchmen had followed the protocol without question. And now it was dead, and the storm was sitting on top of the reservoir, and it wasn't even 6 p.m. I went back to the office and sat down. I thought about calling Abby Garza. I actually picked up my cell and found her number, and then thought about what I'd say. Hey, the beacon's out. And then what? She'd already told me she couldn't come at night. She'd said it the way you say something you don't want to explain further. I put my phone down, ate the second half of the granola bar. The whistling started at 6:17. I knew from the binder it got louder when the beacon was out. I wasn't ready for what louder actually meant. The first few times I'd heard it, it was a sound at the edge of the property, something you could almost argue was wind. This was in the building, not through the walls. In the walls, like the pipes were carrying it up from somewhere below. A single repeated phrase, just a few notes. The kind of thing that almost resolves into something you recognize. Almost. Never quite. I turned on every light in the office. Both lamps, the overhead, the desk lamp in the corner I'd never used because the bulb was weak and buzzed. I didn't have a working beacon, so I figured I'd substitute what I had. I knew it wasn't the same thing. I did it anyway. The landline rang at 1:13 exactly. The display said, "Damn office." I sat and watched it ring 4 times and go to voicemail. Then I thought about the binder again. Dozens of people letting it ring through. Rule 3 said, "Don't answer." Rule 3 did not say, "Don't unplug." I pulled the cord out of the wall jack. The silence after that was pretty good. The whistling was still going somewhere outside, but it felt further away, and the ringing was just gone, and I sat there thinking, okay, that's something. I'm handling it. That lasted about 10 minutes. Then the hallway lights came on, all of them. Every overhead panel in the corridor running from the office toward the intake galleries. The ones I'd verified were off. The ones not on the generator's priority circuit. I had checked that specifically. Those lights were supposed to be dead. They were on. Flat white fluorescent light filling the hallway like it was the middle of a workday. I didn't move for a little while. The smell came under the door next. Not the hallway door. The intake corridor door. The one with the yellow chain on the other side. River mud and something metallic, like a jar of pennies left in standing water. It came in low, along the floor, the way cold air does. I got up and walked to the corridor door. It was open. I was sure I'd checked it. I checked it every night, part of my 9 p.m. round. The corridor door had been closed and latched. Now it was standing open maybe 4 inches, and through the gap was that gray flat light. Not fluorescent, not quite anything I had a name for, just gray and even. The yellow chain was visible through the gap, still latched, still hanging across. Everything past it was shadow. Then I heard the boots, a shuffle. Not footsteps exactly, more like something shifting weight. The sound of rubber soles on wet concrete from inside the corridor, past the chain. In the dark part the gray light didn't reach. I pushed the door shut. I grabbed the nearest chair, the metal folding kind I'd been using as a side table for my water bottle, and shoved it under the door handle the way you see in movies and always think looks dumb. Turns out it works fine on a door that opens inward. The chair legs caught on the tile and held. I went back to the desk, sat down. The whistling was doing something outside I wasn't going to think about too carefully. The hallway lights were still on through the gap under the office door, that flat white strip at floor level. I looked at the landline cord hanging loose from the wall jack. I thought about the binder, 40 years of entries. Nobody had ever mentioned unplugging the phone. They'd mentioned not answering it. The phone itself was always just there, part of the furniture, part of the setup. The rule said don't answer, not don't unplug. But those aren't the same thing. I'd assumed I was cutting off something trying to get through. What if the call wasn't trying to get through? What if the call was the thing doing the holding? I sat with that for a while. The lights in the hallway didn't go out. The smell faded a little around 3 a.m., but didn't fully go away. I didn't sleep. I had my phone, half a charge left, and the clear understanding that I'd done exactly what the rules hadn't told me not to do, and something had immediately gotten worse. The rules covered 5 scenarios. A dead beacon during a power outage wasn't one of them. Unplugging a landline you'd been warned not to answer wasn't one of them. I'd improvised, and whatever I'd thought I was doing, it wasn't that. I'm not blaming the storm. I'd have unplugged the phone eventually. That's on me. By 5 a.m., the sky through the window was lightening into that pre-dawn gray, and the whistling had gone quiet. The chair was still under the door handle. The hallway lights were still on. I hadn't moved from the desk in about 4 hours except once to get my water bottle. I just sat there and waited for it to be morning. Morning came. That was it. Abby's truck pulled into the lot at 6:47. I know the time because I was watching the window by then, sitting at the desk with both hands around a cold coffee cup I wasn't drinking. Her headlights swept across the office wall, and I heard gravel under her tires. She usually came around 9 or 10, never before 7. I didn't move when I heard her key in the lock. She pushed the door open and stopped, looked at the chair jammed under the corridor door handle, looked at the landline sitting on the floor with the cord coiled next to it, looked at me. Her face went through a couple of things I couldn't fully read, but pale was one of them. That was the one that stuck. "Ray," she said. "Morning," I said. She came in and set her bag down slow. Didn't say anything else right away. Walked to the corridor door and put her hand on the back of the chair. Didn't pull it. Just touched it like she was checking the temperature. "How long has this been here?" she said. "Since about 1:30. She nodded like that confirmed something. Looked at the unplugged phone on the floor. "You unplugged it." The line rang during a power outage. I didn't think that was possible. She was quiet for a minute. I could hear the reservoir from here, which I usually couldn't unless the wind was right. Flat and gray out there, not much moving. She was staring at the corridor door. "Okay," she said finally, more to herself than me. I waited. She pulled the rolling chair from the far desk, the one with the cracked armrest, and sat down across from me. She wasn't in a rush anymore. That was different. Every other visit she'd been out the door in 20 minutes. This time she sat like she was settling in. "The phone line," she said. "It's not a phone line." I didn't say anything. It runs to a junction box in the intake corridor. Always has. The signal. Whatever it is that makes it ring. It goes in there and it loops. That's it. Goes in and loops and never gets anywhere. As long as the line's connected. She paused. You unplugged it. You said not to answer it. You didn't say anything about unplugging it. I know. She didn't sound mad. She sounded tired in a specific way, like someone who'd been bracing for a conversation for a long time and now it was finally happening. That's on me. I thought about the lights coming on, the smell under the door, the thing pressing from the other side of that wall at 1:30 in the morning. I said, "The rules aren't precautions." She looked at me. "They're not safety precautions. There's something else." She didn't answer right away. Then, "No, they're not." She got up and went to the metal cabinet against the back wall, the one I'd always figured was full of maintenance schedules and inspection logs and things I'd never need to look at. She had a key on her ring I hadn't seen her use before, smaller than the others, brass, with a tag that said, "Nothing. Just a number. 22. The cabinet door swung open and she started pulling things out, setting them on the desk. Rolled drawings held with a rubber band. A manila folder that had been taped shut and then opened at some point and retaped. A brown envelope with Intake C modifications written on it in black marker, all caps, underlined twice. She laid it all out and stepped back. "Take your time," she said. I started with the drawings. Old corpse blueprints, the kind on pale blue paper with faded white lines. Kinzua Dam. Intake gallery cross-sections. Gallery C was marked differently than A and B. There was a notation along the east wall, a box with a symbol in it I didn't recognize at first. Kind of a closed loop with a line through the middle. Hand-drawn, not printed. Somebody had added it to the original blueprint after the fact. I unrolled the next drawing. Same symbol, different date. The one after that, same. Decades apart, different draftsmen. Same symbol, kept getting added to the Gallery C wall notation like it was standard procedure, and somebody just forgot to tell anyone what it meant. I opened the envelope. Photos. Polaroids first, then standard prints. A few digital ones near the bottom. All of them showing the same section of Gallery C's east wall. The symbol in the first photo was painted on, white paint on gray concrete maybe 2 feet across. In the next photo, it was painted over. Gray on gray, barely visible. In the one after that, it was back, painted again in white, a little larger, then covered again, then painted again, bigger. The last few photos, the more recent ones, it wasn't painted anymore. It was carved, deep grooves in the concrete. Somebody had cut it in with a chisel or something close to it. Like whoever kept covering it up had eventually given up, and whoever kept putting it back had gotten tired of using paint. "What is this?" I said. "We don't know what it means," Abby said. "We know it keeps showing up. We know it's been there since at least 67. That's the first record we have." "Who keeps drawing it?" She didn't answer that one. She slid the manila folder toward me instead. It had a label. Night Watch Personnel, Kinzua Facility. There was a typed roster inside, single-spaced, 2 pages. Names and dates going back about 20 years. Each entry had a start date, an end date, and a status column. Most of the status entries said completed or transferred. A few said resigned. I counted 7 names circled in red. Those had single words next to them in handwriting, not typing. Resigned. That appeared twice. Relocated. Medical. Medical again. Missing. Missing. And one that just said no. I looked up. This one just says no. I know. What does that mean? It means we don't know. I put the folder down. The 7 circled names were spaced out across the full 20 years. Not clustered. Not a bad stretch or a bad year. Just scattered one every couple of years like a pattern that didn't care about timing. I said, Sawyer Crane. Abby looked at her hands. He didn't just get pulled into a tunnel, I said. I read the article, but there was more to it. She was quiet long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, he was in Gallery C during the fill, when they flooded the valley. There was a miscommunication about the timeline, that's what the official report said, and the intake sequence started before everyone was out. He was inside. The water came in fast. She stopped. He didn't make it out, and they sealed it. The protocol at the time was to seal any compromised intake and continue filling. The schedule was the schedule. There were political pressures. The project was already behind. I didn't say anything to that. He was inside when they poured the secondary concrete barrier, she said. Him and... She pressed her mouth flat. There was something already in that intake, something that had been there before they started construction. The Geological Survey noted it, and nobody knew what to do with that notation, so they filed it and moved forward. Standard practice for the time. What kind of something? The survey called it an anomalous acoustic signature, a pocket of unusual acoustic behavior in the rock formation. She said it like she'd read it so many times the words had stopped meaning anything. What it actually was, we don't know. We know it's still there. We know it's been there the whole time. And we know that after Crane, it wasn't just a pocket of acoustic behavior anymore. I looked at the photos again, the symbol carved into the wall. The whistling, I said, gets louder when people are nearby, quieter when they're not. The beacon disrupts it. We don't know why. We just know it does. And the calls. Testing. That's the best way I can describe it. If someone answered, we think they'd hear something that made them want to go to the intake. We had 3 incidents before we installed the loop. After the loop, nothing. Nobody answered, nobody went. I thought about 9 nights of not answering. The caller ID always reading damn office. And the truck. Abby looked at the window. The truck started showing up about 12 years ago. A core maintenance vehicle from the 1960s, same model Crane's crew used, no plates. We ran it every way we could. The VN doesn't match any vehicle in the registry. It's not in our fleet records. It just shows up. She didn't say anything else about the truck. She didn't have to. The driver, I said. There's never been a driver. Not one anyone's seen exit the vehicle. The door opens, that's all. I sat with that. The door specifically bugged me more than most of it. I don't know why, it just did. Gallery C, I said. The rule wasn't about keeping people safe. No. It was about keeping people away from something that's getting closer. Abby looked at me directly for the first time since she'd sat down. The wall has been moving, she said, incrementally. Millimeters per year for the first decade, then more. The modified panel on those drawings, it was installed to monitor the movement. The symbol keeps reappearing because something on the other side of that wall keeps expressing it through the concrete. We don't know how. The rules exist because as long as nobody goes in there, as long as nobody gives it a reason to escalate. She stopped. It stays slow. It stays manageable. Last night wasn't manageable, I said. No, she said. Last night wasn't. She didn't apologize. I didn't expect her to. We just sat there with the folder and the photos and the rolled blueprints spread out between us, and we both looked at them for a while. Outside, the reservoir sat flat and gray and quiet. The spillway beacon was off. The generator was still running. The chair was still under the corridor door handle. Abby left around noon. She took the folder with her, left the blueprints, said she'd be in touch. I watched her truck pull out of the lot and sat there for a while doing nothing useful. I went through the cabinet again that afternoon. I don't know what I was looking for exactly, something to do maybe. I'd already read the incident binder twice. The blueprints were just blueprints. But there was a stack of old maintenance tags in the back corner, the paper kind with carbon copies, bundled with a rubber band that fell apart when I touched it. Most of them were boring. HVAC filter replacements, exterior lighting checks, generator fuel logs. I flipped through maybe 40 of them before I found the one that wasn't boring. It was dated 1989. The top line said, "Spillway Beacon, manual override installed." Below that, in smaller print, override panel located in intake gallery C, junction box J7, accessible via interior corridor, for use in event of primary power failure. I read it twice. Then I thought about every night the beacon had kept the whistling at bay. Every time I'd hit that switch on the main board and watched the red pulse start up and felt the air outside go a little quieter. I'd figured it was just light, bright light, red light, something about visibility and deterrence. But the beacon had a manual override, inside gallery C, right behind the door we weren't supposed to open, right past the yellow chain nobody was supposed to cross. Someone had put the one thing that pushed it back inside the room it was being pushed back from. I don't know if that was intentional or just a terrible coincidence. Knowing what I knew by then, I figured intentional. The tag was dated 3 years after the incident binder entries started getting serious. 1989. Someone had figured it out by then. Someone had installed a direct line and then sealed it away behind a rule. I put the tag in my shirt pocket. I went to the storage room off the main corridor and stood in front of the shelves for a while. There was a full case of Hilti expanding foam, the construction-grade stuff in the orange cans. There was a tube of Loctite construction adhesive, the kind that cures rigid. There were work gloves on a hook by the door. I grabbed 2 cans of foam, the adhesive, and the gloves, and I put them in the canvas bag I used to carry tools around the site. Then I went and got my flashlight from the desk drawer, the big mag light that took 4D batteries, and I set everything by the office door and went and ate dinner. That's the part that feels strange to describe. I made a bowl of instant oatmeal on the camp stove and watched the generator read out and thought about Pittsburgh. Nothing specific, just the general shape of the last year. I wasn't scared yet. I was something else. Tired, maybe. Decided. At 12:58, I picked up the bag. The corridor was cold. That mud and copper smell was still there, lighter than it had been the night before, but still present. The chair was still under the gallery C door handle where I'd left it. I moved it, unlocked the door, and stepped through. The yellow chain was waist-high across the entrance to the intake gallery. The sign on it said, "Authorized personnel only." I've probably stepped over hundreds of those in my life. This one I stood in front of for about 10 seconds. I stepped over it. The gallery ran maybe 60 feet before the first junction point. My flashlight hit concrete on all sides, low ceiling, exposed conduit, the kind of utilitarian space nobody ever meant to look at. The air was colder than the corridor. Still. My boots were loud. Junction box J7 was stenciled on the wall in faded yellow paint about 30 feet in. The panel was recessed into the concrete. A gray metal box with a hinged cover, the kind of thing you'd walk past 100 times without thinking about it. I got close and put the flashlight on the bolts holding the cover closed. They were hand loose, all 4 of them. I put my fingers on the first one and it turned with almost no resistance, like someone had been backing them out over a long time, millimeters at a time. Patient. I didn't let myself think about that too long. The override switch was inside. A single toggle, industrial, labeled beacon, manual. Below it was a small red indicator light, currently off. I flipped the switch. Outside, through the narrow horizontal window slit near the ceiling, the spillway beacon fired up. That red pulse. It hit the window and lit the gallery in a slow throb. Red, dark, red, dark. The whistling stopped. It just stopped. Mid-note or whatever it was. Gone. I exhaled. I hadn't realized I'd been holding anything. Then the wall moved. The wall directly across from the panel, maybe 8 feet away, it flexed inward just slightly, like something on the other side had leaned against it. The concrete didn't crack. It just bowed, the way a thick rubber sheet bows when you push it from behind. And then a seam appeared, low on the wall. A construction joint that had probably been there for 60 years. And it opened. Not wide. An inch, maybe less. Just a thin black gap running about 4 feet horizontally. Something was pressing from the other side. Slow. Not frantic. Patient. I had the foam out of the bag before I'd consciously decided to move. The nozzle went into the gap. I squeezed the trigger and held it and moved the can along the seam, filling it, watching the foam expand and push back out around the nozzle, yellow-white, already hardening at the edges. The pressure from the other side didn't stop. The foam compressed where it was thinnest. I emptied the first can and dropped it, and had the second one in before it hit the floor. The seam held at the width it was. Whatever was pushing kept pushing. When the second can was empty, I had the adhesive tube in my hands. I smeared it over the foam with my gloved palm, thick, working fast, pressing it into the edges where the foam met the concrete. It wasn't a fix. I knew it wasn't a fix, but it was something to put between me and whatever was on the other side of that seam. Then I put both hands against the panel cover and threw my weight into it. The hinged cover latched. I got both hands on the top bolt and ran it down, then the second, the third. My fingers were shaking a little by the fourth one, but I got it closed. The wall was still. The seam was packed. I grabbed the bag and walked back toward the chain. The ringing started somewhere in the building behind me, not the landline, something bigger, like the whole electrical system was vibrating. It peaked, loud enough to feel in my back teeth, and then it cut. Dead silence. I stepped over the yellow chain. Behind me, the whistling started up again, just barely, the beginning of a note, like someone drawing breath, and then it stopped, like it ran out of something to push with. I stood in the corridor with the empty canvas bag and the flashlight, and I didn't move for a while. Then I went and sat at the desk and waited for morning. Morning came gray and flat. I didn't sleep, I just sat at the desk until the windows went from black to the kind of dark blue that means the sun is getting around to it. Then I got up, grabbed the canvas bag I'd been using as a general catch-all for the last few weeks, and put 3 things in it: the laminated rules card, the folder of photos I'd taken with my phone and printed at the Rite Aid in town 2 days earlier, and the incident binder. The binder barely fit. I zipped the bag around it and went to my truck. I drove to the Pennsylvania State Police Barracks on Crescent Park Road. Took me about 22 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the whole way. I don't know why exactly. I just needed something that moved at a normal speed. The barracks were beige brick, a flag out front, 2 cruisers in the lot. I sat in my truck for a minute. Not because I was scared. I just hadn't thought about what I was going to say. I figured I'd say exactly what happened. I went in. A trooper at the front desk asked what I needed. I said I needed to talk to someone about an ongoing safety issue at the Kinzua Dam site. He looked at me for a second, then picked up his phone. Sergeant Denise Wang came out about 4 minutes later. Pressed uniform, sergeant's chevrons, blonde hair tucked behind her ears. Steady eyes that didn't give anything away, just took information in. She said her name and rank. I said mine. She said to come back. Her office was small. Metal desk, 2 chairs, a whiteboard with nothing on it. She sat down and I sat across from her. She had a legal pad already open. She didn't say anything. She waited. I put the canvas bag on her desk. I work night watch at the Kinzua Dam Visitor Center, I said. Corps of Engineers contract. I've been there since October. My supervisor gave me a set of rules on my first day and told me they were non-negotiable. I've been following them. I'm pretty sure they're covering up something that happened in 1964, and they've been using civilian contractors to maintain it without telling anyone what they're actually doing. She wrote something down. Define covering up. So I told her. I went through the whole thing in order. The landline, the whistling, the wet prints, the plateless truck, the incident binder with all the circled names, Sawyer Crane, the articles I'd found at the Warren Library, the cabinet in Abby's office, and the photos of the symbol painted and repainted in Gallery C over 40 years. What Abby had finally told me. What I'd found in Gallery C the night before. The loosened bolts, the panel, the seam. Denise Wang wrote things down. She asked questions that were calm and specific. Dates, times, names. She asked me to describe the symbol. I didn't have good words for it, so I showed her the photo on my phone and she photographed the screen with hers. She asked if I had documentation of the contractor roster. I pulled the binder out and opened it to the page with the circled names. She read it without touching it, then asked me to leave it. I left everything. The card, the photos, the binder. I kept the photo on my phone. She walked me back to the lobby. At the door, she said, "Don't go back to the site until I hear from you." I said that was fine by me. She gave me a card with her direct number on it, small state seal in the corner. I put it in my jacket pocket and drove back to the motel on the other side of Warren. I slept until noon. Woke up to 2 voicemails from a core district number I didn't recognize. I didn't call back. The investigation moved faster than I expected. By Wednesday, 3 days after I'd walked into the barracks, Denise Wang called to say the Corps had been formally contacted and engineers from the Pittsburgh district were being sent to the site. She said I might need to make a recorded statement. I said okay. I made the statement Thursday morning. 2 hours. A trooper sat in and typed while I talked, and Denise Wang asked the questions. She had a printout on the desk that looked like a copy of the incident binder. She asked about Gallery C specifically, what I'd done, what I'd seen. I walked her through it. The foam, the adhesive, the panel, the seam. She didn't react much, just wrote things down. I asked if I'd done something wrong going in there. She said, "You're not the one we're looking at." That was the whole answer. I took it. The Corps engineers got into Gallery C that Friday. Denise Wang called me afterward. They'd found the modified panel with the override switch, the carved symbol on the interior wall, and a secondary contractor roster going back further than the one in the binder. The symbol matched my photo. The foam was still in the seam. She didn't tell me what the symbol meant. I didn't ask. Abby Garza was suspended by the end of that week. The formal charges came later. A letter in the mail, something about unauthorized containment operations and misuse of civilian labor. Reckless endangerment was in there. I read it once, put it in the nightstand drawer, and didn't look at it again. I felt bad about it, a little. Not for her exactly. More for the version of the situation where she'd been stuck knowing something terrible for 20 years and hadn't found a way out that didn't involve handing people a laminated card and hoping for the best. That's probably me reading into things. I don't actually know what she felt. She never called. The Corps sealed Gallery C the following week, reinforced concrete directly behind the flexing wall. I heard this from Denise Wang, who got it from the engineering report. They also rewired the spillway beacon to a completely independent power supply. Its own circuit, its own breaker, its own backup. Something that couldn't drop when the main power failed. I wasn't on site for any of it. I was at the motel mostly, walked around Warren a couple of times, got coffee at a place on Pennsylvania Avenue with a handwritten menu that played Tom Petty at low volume, ate a lot of eggs, watched whatever was on. I'm not great at waiting, but I didn't have anywhere else to be. The night after the Corps sealed Gallery C, I slept straight through without waking up. I didn't think about that until later. The 113 calls stopped. No more calls at all, according to what a trooper mentioned in passing during one of my check-ins. Whatever had been cycling through that line just quit. The whistling was gone, not quieter. Gone. None of the engineering crew reported hearing it during 3 days of work inside Gallery C. Just concrete and cold air and the smell of a dam doing what it does. I picked up my last paycheck on a Tuesday. Not from Abby. from a core administrative office in Warren that had taken over contractor payments since the suspension. A woman at the front desk handed me an envelope with my name on it and asked me to sign a receipt. She was polite. She didn't look at me any particular way. I signed and left. I loaded my truck that afternoon. Didn't take long. I'd been living out of a bag since October. 2 duffels, a backpack, a box of food from the mini fridge, my work boots on the floor behind the passenger seat. I dropped the room key in the box by the motel office. The woman at the front desk waved. I waved back. I took Route 6 east out of Warren. The reservoir was visible for a stretch before the road curved away. Gray water, gray sky, trees stripped down bare. The spillway beacon was running. Red pulse, steady and slow, visible from the road. I watched it until the bend took it. I don't know exactly what was in Gallery C. I don't know what Sawyer Crane became after 60 years inside that wall, or what the symbol was supposed to do, or whether the foam and adhesive I'd smeared into that seam actually mattered. I'm not a structural engineer. I'm not anything, really. I was just the guy watching the building. What I know is the concrete held. The seam didn't open again. The beacon stayed on. And whatever had been pressing from the other side, patient, slow, apparently fine with waiting decades for someone to slip up, it stopped. That's enough for me. Pittsburgh was still back there somewhere, and my stuff was in a storage unit on the north side, and at some point I'd have to deal with that. The bad year was still waiting too. All of it still there, a couple hours down the road. But right then I was just on Route 6 with the heater going, and a coffee in the cup holder, and the whole morning ahead of me. I kept driving,